The Island of Shadows ****. The mist rolled over the water like a living thing, coiling and twisting around the old, rusted boat that carried them toward the island. Ethan, gripping the oars, broke the silence. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Claire? I mean, the stories." His voice trailed off, his eyes darting to the shoreline that slowly came into view. The Island of Shadows, they called it. Claire, ever the skeptic, laughed it off. "Come on, Ethan. You don't actually believe that crap, do you? Haunted island? Angry spirits? It's just an old ghost story." Beside her, Zoe tightened her grip on the edge of the boat, her knuckles white. She had been quiet ever since they'd set out from the mainland. I don't know, Claire. Something doesn't feel right about this place." "Relax, Zoe. We'll be in and out. We'll take a few pictures, prove nothing's here, and head back." "Easy." Claire's bravado did little to calm the rising tension. As the boat scraped against the rocky shore, the wind carried a low, almost imperceptible whisper through the trees. It sounded like a word, "welcome." Ethan shuddered. Did you hear that?" "No," Claire said quickly, jumping out of the boat and dragging it up the beach. "Come on, let's get this over with." The three friends stepped onto the island, the air growing colder with every step they took. Trees twisted unnaturally, their branches gnarled like claws reaching out to snag them. The ground beneath their feet was damp, soft, as though it had rained, but the sky was clear, a pale gray hanging low above them. As they ventured deeper, the forest seemed to close in around them. No birds, no insects. Only the sound of their breathing and the crunch of dead leaves underfoot. Claire was the first to break the silence again. "The old lighthouse is up ahead. That's where most of the legends come from, right?" Zoe nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "They say the keeper went mad, killed his whole family, then himself. His spirit is supposed to haunt the place, looking for more souls to take." Yeah. "And people say they've seen lights at night, heard screaming." Claire rolled her eyes, but her words lacked their usual confidence. The lighthouse stood before them now, tall and broken, a dark silhouette against the sky. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, and the air around it felt heavy, thick, like walking through water. "Okay, let's just get inside, take some pictures, and get out of here," Ethan muttered, pulling out his phone. The moment they crossed the threshold, the temperature plummeted. Inside, the lighthouse was worse than they had imagined. Old, rotting wood creaked underfoot, and the smell of dampness and decay filled their noses. Faint echoes of footsteps, too light to belong to any of them, seemed to follow them as they explored. "Guys," Zoe whispered, pointing to a dusty mirror on the wall. "Look." In the reflection, there were more figures than just the three of them. Dark, shadowy forms moved in the background, shifting and writhing as if trapped within the glass. Ethan backed away, his eyes wide. "We need to go. Now." But Claire, ever defiant, approached the mirror, squinting at the shadows. "It's just a trick of the light, or dust, or something." Suddenly, the mirror cracked, a sharp, splintering sound that echoed through the lighthouse. The shadows twisted violently, and for a moment, a face pressed against the glass, distorted, gaunt, eyes hollow and full of rage. Claire screamed and stumbled backward, crashing into Ethan. "What the hell was that?" "I told you we shouldn't have come here," Zoe cried, already halfway to the door. But when they turned to leave, the door wasn't there. In its place was a solid wall, as though the lighthouse itself had shifted around them. Panic set in. "We came through that door," Ethan stammered, pushing against the wall. "It was right here." A low, guttural laugh echoed from the stairwell that spiraled up the lighthouse tower. The sound reverberated off the walls, growing louder, closer. "Who's there?" Claire yelled, but no one answered. Zoe pointed up the stairs, her face pale. I think we have to go up." Without any other choice, they began to climb. The steps groaned under their weight, and the air grew colder with each step. As they ascended, they heard whispers, soft at first, but growing louder, more insistent. Words they couldn't understand, spoken in voices that weren't their own. "Keep moving," Claire urged, though her voice was trembling now. Suddenly, Zoe stopped, frozen in place. Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Ethan asked, but then he heard it too. A faint sobbing. Childlike, coming from above them. Zoe's eyes filled with tears. "We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be here." The sobbing grew louder as they reached the top of the lighthouse. The room at the top was small, the windows shattered, letting in the cold, salty wind from the sea. In the center of the room was an old, broken lantern, its light long extinguished. And beside it, a little girl stood, her back to them, her hair matted and wet, her clothes tattered. She was crying softly, her shoulders shaking with each sob. "Hey, are you okay?" Claire asked, stepping forward, though her gut screamed at her to stay back. The girl's sobbing stopped abruptly. Slowly, she turned around. Her face, or what was left of it, was twisted, rotting, her eyes black pits of nothingness. Her mouth opened in a scream, but no sound came out. Instead, the wind outside roared violently, shaking the lighthouse to its core. "Run!" Ethan shouted, grabbing Claire and Zoe and pulling them back toward the stairs. But the stairs were gone. Where there had once been a narrow spiral staircase, now there was only a sheer drop into darkness. "We're trapped!" Claire screamed. The little girl moved toward them, her footsteps silent despite the rotting wood beneath her. As she drew closer, the temperature dropped further, their breath visible in the frigid air. Her eyes locked onto theirs, empty, yet filled with an insatiable hunger. "Stay back!" Zoe shouted, her voice trembling. But the girl didn't stop. She reached out, her cold, dead fingers brushing Zoe's arm. Zoe screamed, collapsing to the floor as frost spread up her skin, her breath freezing in her throat. "Zoe!" Ethan and Claire yelled, trying to pull her away, but it was no use. Zoe's eyes rolled back in her head, her body going limp as the cold consumed her. The girl smiled, a grotesque, twisted smile, and in that moment, Claire and Ethan knew they were next. Desperation kicked in. Ethan grabbed the broken lantern, swinging it wildly at the ghostly figure. The lantern passed through her, but for a brief moment, she flickered, her form wavering like smoke. "Go!" Claire yelled, pushing Ethan toward the window. "We have to jump." "Are you insane?" Ethan shouted, but the look in Claire's eyes left no room for argument. They ran to the broken window, the wind howling as it whipped through their hair. Below them, the jagged rocks jutted out of the crashing waves. It was suicide, but staying meant certain death. The girl's hollow eyes watched them, her smile growing wider as she moved closer. Claire looked at Ethan, her face pale but determined. "Together?" "Together," Ethan agreed, gripping her hand. They jumped. For a moment, there was nothing but the wind and the sound of the waves below. And then, darkness. Ethan gasped for air, his body aching as he awoke on the rocky shore. The island loomed behind him, the lighthouse a dark silhouette against the sky. "Claire," he shouted, looking around desperately. "Claire!" But there was no answer. Only the distant whisper of the wind, and a single footprint in the sand beside him, leading back to the island. To this day, Ethan is the only one who made it off the island of shadows. But sometimes, when he closes his eyes, he still hears the sobbing of that little girl, and the soft, cold touch of her fingers on his skin.
Don't forget to subscribe.